Welcome to Is This Great Game or What? And our guest this week is my dear friend, Jeremy Shap, the best journalist that we have at ESPN. Jeremy, welcome to the podcast. This is Jeffrey Kirkchin. I think you met him once briefly.
I am so excited to be here. I am a huge fan of the pod. It really is. It's almost like a warm blanket for me. You know what do kids call them? They're like snugglies. Like I turn it on and I feel good. I love listening to you guys. I love the tone. I love the information. I love the laughs. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's about time we got Jeremy Shap on the pod because he's only gotten a mention in every episode for the last 6 weeks, I feel like, which is great.
Like DiMaggio.
Right. Yeah.
Or maybe Wee Willie at least.
Right.
Pete Rose and I are tied.
Right. Jeremy is weighing in on all sorts of things, including all the stupid stuff that we do. We had the all-female team baseball, and Jeremy threw us Granny Hamner and all that. And, of course, I left out Christy Mathewson, and Jeremy did too. I felt so much better than Jeremy. And what was that, your grandfather's favorite player?
My grandfather, Christy Mathewson, was an idol, even though he was a Brooklyn guy. Right. And Christy was a little bit before his time. His favorite player growing up was Zach Wheat. His favorite players were Zach Wheat and Dazzy Vance. But Christy Mathewson was his idol. You know, Christy Mathewson, turn of the 20th century, the man who turned the game into a gentleman's game and went to college at Bucknell and played chess and enlisted, in his late 30s in World War I. So Christy Mathewson was always like, when you heard his name, there was this organ music or something, this aura, a halo around it, and forgot it.
Yeah. Jeff, it's just amazing that Jeremy knows this much about the history of baseball. So, Jeremy, I'm going to embarrass you several times today. 20 years ago, we're driving from Yankee Stadium back into the city where Jeremy lives. He's giving me a ride. And on the way, he's telling me the starting rotation for the 1910 Philadelphia A's, Jack Coombs and, Eddie Plank and Chief Bender.
Plank, Waddell.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
All those guys.
Then, Jeff, we pass a art gallery, and he proceeds, with no pretense involved, he proceeds to tell me what is hanging in that art gallery. Like, nobody can know both of those things.
It was all a setup.
The only Monet I know is Monet Davis, and he knew all sorts of things hanging. Jeremy, where does this vast depth of knowledge come from? Now, don't be modest. Explain how you know
you're
this.
Very kind. I'm very flattered. I've spent my lifetime, I'm 56 now, accumulating random facts, different things, historical stuff, baseball especially. I've tried to broaden it out, but it was all kind of fun and kind of a cool party trick before we all had all of that information at our fingertips, in our pockets, in our phones. Now it's totally useless. Like we used to say, this is useless. Why did you memorize every vice president? Why did you memorize every losing major party candidate for president? It was because knowledge and intelligence are different. At least I could always say I've got a lot of knowledge, but now it doesn't do anything for you. You know what I mean?
But you could do that with presidents, Jeremy?
That I can do, Tim. I can do the kings and queens of England from the conquest to now in order. So that's 1066, obviously, to now. I used to be able to do the Saxons and the Danes, but I've forgotten most of them. It's all of it. All it means, as you guys know, is that I had a misbegotten youth, a wasted youth. And this has been my lot for a long time. My dad wrote a story for the New York Times in 1978 about my baseball obsessiveness and trivia obsessiveness. And, it stuck. It stuck. The baseball stuff, most of it has stuck. Although, I get frustrated, an immaculate grid every day. If I can't remember, if Bob Johnson played, for, did he ever play for the Senators too? And then was it the Browns? And it's fading as I get older, but I try.
Jeremy, we had Mike Schur on the podcast, and he is a seamhead in every way. Of course, highly involved in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, created that show, Parks and Rec, The Office. but he said that he had to now put limits on himself for Immaculate Grid because he would spend all day trying to figure out, and his wife had to say,
never heard of anybody acting that way in my life. I've never.
Right. And the obsession goes so deep. And one thing I've heard from my dad about you, and I think all three of us have this in common when it comes to little isms about us that are just unexplainable. So when you have, and I want you to confirm this for me, when you have bills in your wallet, you organize them singles, fives, 10. Like
that's a Willie Weinbaum thing. He'd love.
Just tell the story.
All right. So yes, it was one of these weird quirks, if you will. So, in the old days, the paper mints around the country, right? The places where they produce the paper money as opposed to, the coins, which I think there were just a couple of mints, right? It was Philly and another one out west. But the paper mints, they were A through L. And on, every note, there was a little circle with a letter in it, A through L, and the A through L denoted at which mint it was printed. So I don't know, we all look at these things, our whole lives. So naturally I memorized the letters and which mints they correspond to. And then it's a short leap to then organizing your bills in your wallet by those mints, right? The A's for Boston's, the B's for New York, the C's for Philadelphia, etc. Why does that seem so crazy?
Jeff, I said to Jeremy one night, I tested him. I said C, and he went Philadelphia. Don't waste my time. I never even thought about this.
Now, what I do have to say, it's been a while because they stopped doing it. So they no longer, it's been about 20 years since they had the circles with them, but there is a serial code and the first digit in the serial code is a letter, which I believe corresponds to the mint, but it used to be a big circle. So I think I can still do it. D is Cleveland, E is Richmond, F is Atlanta, G is Chicago, H is St. Louis, I is Minneapolis, J is Kansas City, K is Dallas, and L is San Francisco. I mean, everybody knows that, right?
Jeremy, you're my friend, but what is wrong with you? How could you possibly know that after all you memorized it when you were 12 and you're 56 and you could still do it?
56. I don't know. I don't know, but there is kind of a family trait for it. And my father, he was better socialized than I was. So he wouldn't talk about it, but he knew a lot of stuff like that too. He didn't feel the need to brag about it like I do. So, and then his first cousin, my first cousin once removed, is a guy named Phil Shap. Phil, my cousin, he died a few years ago, but he was remains widely considered the foremost expert on jazz ever in the world.
The Utah Jazz?
Won all kinds.
Sorry, keep
Frank Layden. He's a big Frank Layden guy. And his father as well, my Uncle Walter, preceded him as a jazz expert. And Phil was the kind of guy, if you said to him, I know when your wife was born, Jeff, she was born just a few days before 2131. When were you born?
I was born August 9th, 93.
Well, she was born on 2130.
She was born,
yes,
my wife, Jeremy, we just found this out. I mean, you would think we've been doing the pod for 2 years, but our whole lives have been surrounding this amazing event.
That's
the
amazing.
Orioles. I grew up in Maryland.
I know, it's crazy.
You would have think a guy like me would have married her because of that, but I never knew.
All right, he would say what?
So you tell him when you were born, he'd say, oh, that was a Tuesday. And not through mathematical formula, but because he knew a jazz record that was recorded that day, and he just would know the day of the week, and he would know every musician who played on the record. He would know what the weather was outside the studio. And he got into jazz at the age of 10 or 11, growing up in Hollis, Queens, where all of his neighbors were these famous figures from the great jazz age. But before he got into jazz, he was a big football fan. And so he basically knew every NFL score, at least college football score, up until the day that he got interested in jazz. And then he didn't know anything afterwards. He asked him to win the Super Bowl. that year, he would have no idea. But everything before 1965, he knew.
That's unbelievable. Now, Jeremy, don't be modest here. Give me something that you don't know anything about. Now, that's a lot of things for me. Just give me something that you have no
pop culture.
Pop culture.
I know nothing about current pop culture. I'm 56, but I might as well be 96. I mean, it's totally foreign to me, and I don't I haven't really followed new music since maybe like the early 80s. So, the entire kind of hip hop era, I just don't know. The music my kids listen to, I don't know. The shows they watch, all of the contemporary cultural milestones are lost on me. They talk about these big stars. Like I did a show last week with these 3 big influencers on we did it like a new iteration of the Sports Reporters. So it was me and these 3 20-something influencers who have big followings: Anthony Hamilton Jr., Katie Feeney, Annie Agar. And it was like I was Uncle Junior in The Sopranos. Like it was like everything was like about Angie Dickinson, as far as, I was like that far. And that's not just it. I'm like, if I ended up on Jeopardy and it was some kind of science category, my 13-year-old son would blow me out of the water. I mean, history, science, I'd be okay. But actually, like, knowing how things work, that is way beyond me. Not like the Kirchens, who have all this mathematical and scientific, stuff in their heads.
Some of the Kirchens have that stuff in their head. My father, Jeff's grandfather, had that stuff in his head. He was a PhD in mathematics, MIT undergrad. It did not go to his youngest son. Trust me.
It's there somewhere. I feel like it's got to be there somewhere.
Well, Jeremy, it's so funny because, we have talked about my grandfather, my dad's dad, Pop, who I was named after. He was the kind of guy who would, when the power went out at the party because the speakers were too loud, he would go stand up and start singing to just keep the party going and trying to get people to sing along for 2 reasons. 1, he didn't want the party to stop. And 2, he wanted people to think he had a really great singing voice. And it's so
a pretty good reason.
It's so funny because, we're grown up. I was raised next door to my grandfather, which was the greatest thing that my dad ever did for us. And, it breaks my heart constantly not being able to be closer to my parents or my wife's parents as my daughter McKinley begins to grow up. But with Dad coming down for the podcast, it's so special. Doing this podcast with my dad, I've learned so much from him, whether it's how to prepare an interview, even talking with you, Jeremy, and you are, and I mean this respectfully, a softball interview. You listen to the show. You're fantastically intelligent. You've been friends with my dad for 100 years. So to even prep, we don't even need to prep, but we sit and we talk, and to be in his mind on how he wants to approach an interview is the greatest classroom I've ever been a part of. For you, with a wildly successful father, and my dad calls him the greatest interviewer of all time. Do you remember being a young kid and learning things like 5, 6, 7 years old from your dad that you still carry in your 50s today?
I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, it was the same thing like you guys have. I grew up going to the ballpark with my dad, going to the office with my dad. When I was a little kid, he was working at NBC at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. And I spent my weekends on the 7th floor at 30 Rock, and he shared an office with Marv Albert and, the guys on the news. It was Chancellor, and then it was Brokaw, and it was Jack Cafferty and Chuck Scarborough at WNBC. And then he went to ABC, and, he was working with, Peter Jennings and Ted Koppel. And I got to go to the office. I wanted to be around him. I happen to be a kid who loved sports. So what could be better than, one of the most respected guys in the industry who had incredible access to everything and had the respect, much like your dad, of the athletes that he has covered. And it was a tremendous education. And I think, I probably didn't understand or appreciate this when I was 10 or 11, but by the time I was in high school, I understood how good he was at what he was doing. And I understood why he had been successful. And, I hope that at least through constant observation and osmosis, I picked up on some of it. It was like getting a PhD in the business, as a kid.
Right. It was amazing. So, Jeff, one of the greatest nights of my life is when we went out of New York one night. Now, Jeremy's going to tell the story. He knows where I'm going here. But Dick Schaap used to say, I collect people. Others collect stories or autographs. Dick Schaap collected people. Tell us, Jeremy, about the night, the only night that I really got to go out with your dad and others. It was amazing.
That's crazy. I remember. So, and I'm having trouble remembering which of those Yankees World Series it was, 98, 99, or 2000. But it was one of those. And somehow as a big group, I don't know, it was probably about a dozen people, right? We ended up at Carmine's in Times Square. I think my father, which is this big, giant restaurant. And, it's really a tourist spot, but he was very enthusiastic always about their steak. Strangely enough, Italian restaurant, family style Italian restaurant, Times Square. He had this obsession with their the Italian style steak with like the rosemary on it. So he's like, whenever we had a chance, and we went, and I remember it was Tim and Charlie Steiner was with us. I think Alan Schwartz, who was then at the New York Times, was with us. That's how I remember it. Willie, I believe, was there. And my father, was a great storyteller, and he would, regale, the table and hold court. And he had some great stories to tell. And I remember your father being Tim. You're sitting right there. I should say Tim being, very excited about it. Of course, I had heard all the stories, 30, 40 times, but I still enjoyed it.
Welcome to my world, Jeremy. Welcome.
I know. Like I heard you talking about, and I don't know if it's where was it where you got it, but a few weeks ago you were talking about the Tom Seaver Muhammad Ali story.
Tell the story. You tell it better than I do.
Yeah. Oh, it's so great, right? So it's but you just told it a few weeks ago. We don't want to tell it again.
Better than I do.
So the story basically is, and this was about, so my dad, and if there was one guy who my father, interviewed the most, covered the most, all the years that he was in the business for half a century, it was Ali. And he got to know Ali before he went to the Olympics in Rome as an 18-year-old in 1960. He was literally on his way to Rome with the U.S. boxing team. My father at the time was an editor at Newsweek, and he spent time with him. He spent time with him when he got home from the trip to Rome, and that relationship was maintained for the next 40 years. And when Ali was banned from boxing after refusing induction, and he was living in Chicago, at that time, my father had started writing these As Told To books with the biggest figures in sports. So Jerry Kramer and Joe Namath and Dave DeBusschere and Frank Beard and Tom Seaver. Eventually, he did them with Montana and Gretzky and Aaron and Bo Jackson. But the Mets had just won the '69 World Series. And he would pump out these books, for full commercial advantage. And the book he wrote with Tom Seaver was called The Perfect Game. But it was really the story of his life, and especially the '69 season. We're talking about, as you guys know, the biggest, arguably the most famous athlete in America, right? In the winter of '69-'70. And Ali's living in Chicago. And this is still, this is 2 years before the Supreme Court says, overturns his conviction and he gets back into the ring. And, they're out there promoting the book, my father and Tom. And so he says to Tom, hey, why don't we go have dinner with the champ? And Tom's like, that's great. I'd love to have dinner with Muhammad Ali. So they go out to dinner together at some, I don't know if it was Rosebud or what is it, Gino and something, the famous one. It's one of those famous restaurants. And they walk in, and Ali, in his typical fashion, is holding court and telling stories. And it's my father and it's Tom. Maybe there's another couple of guys. And this is going on for hours. The food's coming in multiple courses, and this and that, and blah, blah, blah. I'm sure Tom's had a couple of drinks. My father, Ali, would have abstained. And then finally, after about 2 hours, and they're on the coffee portion of the meal, I think no caffeine either, but I'm not sure. He turns to Tom and he says, Tom, you a nice fella. What paper you write for?
How did Tom Stever react to that?
I wish I could tell you, Tim. I never really got that far in the story with my dad.
Oh.
I think he said something like, I won 25 games and the Hickok belt and the Cy Young Award. But Willie McCovey won the MVP. But I don't know. I'm sure he just said the Chicago Sun-Times.
That is just so that is so great. The only mistake your dad ever made in the business was during the 56 World Series, correct? Tell us what happened.
Right. So my father graduated from college in 55. He graduated from Columbia Journalism in 56, and he went to work immediately at Newsweek, where his boss was Roger Kahn.
Mm-hmm.
And he was living, I don't know exactly where he was living the first few months, but he was going to move to New Jersey, and he had tickets to, I want to say it was Game 5, right? It's Game 5?
Yes, Game 5.
It's Game 5. He had tickets to Game 5, but Barbara, his first wife, who, I don't know, and Barbara's lovely. Barbara's still with us. My mother was my father's second wife. So he and Barbara have just gotten married, and they've got to find an apartment, and they picked this day with a realtor or something to look at apartments. And he gave up his ticket to Game 5. And of course, Mr. Larson, 27 up, 27 down. And he would never in his life see even a no-hitter.
Wow.
He had his chance for a perfect game, and he never even saw a no-hitter.
Your dad never covered a no-hitter.
I have not either.
Jeremy,
Never.
I've seen 8, including one
That's
perfect game. Look, that I'm not one-upping anyone. That's unbelievable to me.
I've never seen a no-hitter. This doesn't even come close to counting, so I don't even know why I'm mentioning them. I was at Yankee Stadium probably within minutes of the last out for both Cone and Wells, because they called me, in the 6th inning, and I lived in Midtown and said, get up to the stadium. And I'd get up there, but I'm 100% sure that I didn't even get to see the last strike for either of them. And that was my father's only chance. But think about it, my father was never a beat reporter. He was never a newspaper sports writer.
Right.
He was a magazine sports writer at Newsweek, and then he became the city editor of the New York Herald Tribune. But he never worked in a newspaper sports department, which is where you're going to end up seeing the most games.
That makes sense.
And then, of course, there was a long period of time. It's not like the 21st century where there are just no hitters all the time and everybody's swinging like crazy. And we talked about, you had Jim Abbott on last week, and that was terrific. And he's the best. And one of the things when we did this doc at E60 about Jim, for the younger people on the show, it's like, oh, no hitter, what's the big deal? No, you don't understand. No hitters in 1993 were really unusual.
Mm-hmm.
It was a totally different ballgame. His was only the second Yankees no hitter after Larson, right? It was Righetti and then Abbott. And at that point, it had been 37 years, and then you had Gooden, and then you had Cone, and then you had Wells, and you had a whole bunch of them. And now it seems like, and then there was that span where you had perfect games, like 7 of them in like 4 years or something. It was different.
Jeremy, I have to say, the documentary you did was so good. The interview, I watched it shortly before we spoke to Jim Abbott, and I said to myself, well, we're never, ever going to interview Jim Abbott quite like he got interviewed in that documentary. So we're going to have to ask him a whole bunch of other questions.
You probably didn't have 12 hours to do it either. We do very long interviews. And I do want to say, it was directed by Mike Farrell. And I don't know if Tim, have you ever worked with Mike?
He's great.
I mean, he's so great. I mean, I love taking credit for things. It's really like it's my MO, but I would love to, and given any opportunity, but this was really, it was so much about Mike, and it was so much about Mike's dynamic with Jim, and Jim just, you just can't ask for more.
No, you can't.
In terms of the story or the guy.
He blew us away on our podcast, Jeremy, and he was fantastic in your documentary. If anybody listening missed either of those, go listen and watch both of those because they're fantastic. But I want to talk about something else you did in your career that has shared common ground with my dad, which is related to Bobby Fischer. Because my dad...
Oh, wait, I don't know the Bobby Fischer connection.
Well, my dad's arguably top 5 favorite movie of all time is Searching for Bobby Fischer.
I didn't know that.
Jeremy, it's my guilty pleasure. It's the movie that not everybody saw or loved that I think is one of the greatest movies I've ever seen. I loved it. I've seen it 25 times. It's so beautifully acted. Wow. Yes. All right, Jeff, get to the point.
I saw it. I thought it was a great movie. I interviewed it's Josh Waitkin, right? Yeah. Who is the inspiration. Not like Eddie Waitkus, fortunately. Josh Waitskin.
Josh Waitskin, right.
Yeah.
Waitskin. So my father and I interviewed him together on our radio show a million years ago, and he became like a judo champion and a karate champion, right? Like all kinds of martial arts, not even like one, I think. Anyway, I'm sorry. I digress.
Well, I got frustrated when he did that. I said, you can't be a master chess champion and be able to beat me up. Okay, you got to have one or the other. It's just not fair. When we had Adnan Virk on the show, Adnan went to the party for my dad when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. And he wrote on this giant poster that my mom put up, which is now hanging in his office, where everybody, hey, congrats, Tim, great career, so proud of you, whatever. Dad, he quoted a movie or a line from Searching for Bobby Fischer, which is not the line that anybody would have quoted from it. Right, it's great.
Right, that's how much.
What is it?
Oh, it's where Joan Allen says, he's not weak, he's decent. And if you or, God darn it, I got to remember, you or, I can't believe I can't remember the name of.
This is great. Yeah. You got the gist of it.
He said, if you try to beat that out of him, I'll take him away. I swear to God. It was one of the most powerful scenes in the entire movie. I can't.
So Joe Mantegna was the dad.
Right. And Joan Allen was the mother. And he played Gandhi.
Ben Kingsley.
Who played Gandhi? Who played Gandhi? Help me.
Ben Kingsley.
Ben Kingsley played the coach.
Oh,
right.
I thought,
right.
I thought you were talking. I thought there was a character in the movie named Gandhi. I was like, what? I'm like, oh, I got a Tom Seaver story in Gandhi.
Yes, tell it, please.
I'll hold on to that.
Tell it now.
So, all right. So this is like my claim to fame as a kid. So when I was a kid, I've already mentioned Seaver. My dad wrote that book together, and they were friendly. And our family lived in the town of Greenwich, Connecticut, and Tom lived in Greenwich, Connecticut. And one day, my dad came home with a cat, a Persian cat. No, I'm sorry, Himalayan cat, which are like Persian and Siamese mixed, right? I think. And it was like, well, what are we going to name the cat? And like, I guess he thought, Gandhi and the Himalayas, India, it's all vaguely connected. So the cat was Gandhi, but we called him Gandhi. Didn't make any sense. But that was our cat, the cat I grew up with, for like 14 years. But this is the Seaver. The brother, he took home 2 cats. One went to us and one went to Tom. And Tom named his Fergie after Mr. Jenkins, to whom he had just finished second for the 1972 Cy Young Award.
Really?
So as a tribute to Jenkins, he named his cat Fergie.
Oh.
And so we had brothers, as I was growing up. And then I remember Seaver more than once, as I recall, when he was with the Reds. So now at this point, Fergie's a few years old. He would bring Fergie to spring training. Gandhi never went to spring training. He stayed home. He'd bring Fergie to spring training, and he'd always run away. And so, like, he'd miss a start trying to find
his cat
Fergie somewhere near, where was it? Plant City, where the Reds.
Yeah, the Reds were in Plant City. Yes.
I remember, like, my poor cat stuck in an apartment in New York City. We moved back to New York, and now, Fergie, his twin brother, is out there exploring the wilds of Florida. That's my other.
Right. Well, the Gandhi story for me is that Steve Rushin, the world's funniest, greatest writer ever, he wrote about a guy that he played golf with. He said, this guy hit it as long and as true as the movie Gandhi. That's how he explained this guy off the tee. As long and as true as the movie Gandhi. I love that. All right, Jeremy, we got to go back to Jim Abbott. I'm sorry. We got sidetracked by everything else. He made us cry. at the end of that interview, when we asked him, what does he say to an 8-year-old who comes to him and is missing his left hand or his right hand? And he literally made.
And you're talking about another
Yes,
McKinley.
it was incredible. Yeah. So tell me about a moment that you had with Jim Abbott that you did not see coming, that you had to pull yourself together in order to get through it.
So, during the interviews, I'm not sure we had a moment like that where it hit me in that way. Where I just couldn't go on. I mean, there was a lot of emotion, but I knew Jim's story really well, and he's great at communicating it, and he's very self-deprecating. What really did hit me, and so, in the process of rolling out the film, we did a film festival and we did a number of premieres, and every single time I would just start bawling, like in public, like I'm watching the film and I'm just and it would be a different moment each time. It wouldn't be the same time. Like the first time I remember, we're in New York at this screening, and there's a big crowd there, and it's the first time I'm seeing the final cut, and it's the first time Jim's seeing it at all. And we're there with Shaquem Griffin, and Mike's there, obviously, Farrell, and Jim's family. And when he tells the story of his teacher who taught him how to tie his shoelaces, who, you think about, this is in 1972 in Flint, Michigan, right? And one of his teachers has taken the time, and he tells this story, right, so beautifully, to figure out, because one of the, things that, increased his sense of isolation was he couldn't tie his own shoelaces with one hand. And his parents would have to triple knot them and all this, and inevitably they'd still come undone, and it would be embarrassing. And he didn't need that. And one of his teachers went home one night, and he basically put his hand, one hand, I don't know which one, in a fist, and spent however much time it took to figure out, using his hand the way that Jim could only use his right hand to tie shoes. And there's something about that story, right? And then he comes in and he teaches. I'm welling up thinking about it now. It just. And then there's the whole sequence at the end with all of those kids he's connected with, and people who were once kids who are now adults, whose lives he changed, whose horizons he expanded. However, I don't put it as well as Jim, whatever he did. But every time I'm just sitting there like a puddle, and I'm like, this is embarrassing. And I'm not known as a crier, and those stories get me every time.
It's incredible. It's the other people in their lives that made the big difference. It's not always mom. It's not always dad. Sometimes it's a coach. Sometimes it's a teacher. And I think it's just so incredible. And hearing that story, it just chills all across the board.
Well, Jeremy, I'm going to repeat when I saw Jim in spring training last March. I just love this. I saw him and I just casually said, Jim, tell me about that triple you hit in spring training. He just looked at me. His eyes got this big and he goes, Rick Russell, sinker down. Like he remembered it. And he was, okay. I just thought that was so human of him. But of course, everything is so human about him. All right, switching gears completely here, Jeremy. You went to see the Savannah Bananas with your daughter at Yankee Stadium. Please explain all of that.
So, I have a friend, Andrew Levy, who, he has this business where he arranges appearances for mostly Yankees and stuff like that. And his business sent out an email saying Savannah Bananas, tickets, something like that. So I said to my 10-year-old daughter, Annabelle, I said, Annabelle, you have any interest? You want to go to Yankee Stadium? Because she's always bugging me that I haven't taken her to enough baseball games, and she's got a point. And I say, do you want to go to a Savannah Bananas game? Thinking she has no idea. She's like, oh my God, the Savannah Bananas. It was like saying the Beatles to a teenage girl in 1963, right? Like I had no idea she was aware of their existence. And she was so excited. So we took a couple of her friends. And I mean, I get to Yankee Stadium. I get there 3 hours before first pitch. And I walk out of the parking lot and it's like the 4th of July. I mean, I'm talking outside the stadium. I'm talking those ball fields. I was not prepared for this. I had read the website and all that. It was like Mardi Gras without the hurricanes. It was like, it was chaos. And then the last time I'd been at the stadium, I hadn't been there this season, was for the World Series. And this was wilder.
Wow.
I mean, nothing against the World Series. I love a good World Series. The energy at this thing, it was sold out. Every seat was filled. Everybody was into it. The music never stops. I was especially enthusiastic because I'd been told that once, the first pitch is thrown, you were on the clock. It's 2 hours. That was not the case. There were extra innings. But nevertheless, we still got out of there at like 9:20. And it was, it did remind me, I think, other people have said, obviously, like when I was a kid, I went to Globetrotters games. I took my son to a Globetrotters game a couple of years ago. But this energy with, 60,000 plus at the new stadium, it was insane. And the enthusiasm, the excitement, the kids were into it. I had no idea what was going on. I was trying to listen to like 12 different rules and stuff. I mean, I might as well have been at a cricket match. But I don't know how that guy in the stilts finds home plate. I got no idea. But it was awesome.
Right. Jeremy, we had Jesse Cole on, and I want you to explain.
And so did Annabelle.
Right. How do you explain the popularity of the Savannah Bananas in the country now? What does it say about our country and the sports and the entertainment that we like?
Well, I think it says, that we're in a different place than when we were kids, the three of us, through different eras, right? And I think, we are in an era now where I'm not sure kids have the same patience to sit there and watch a traditional game. Some do, of course. There is enthusiasm, but it goes beyond that. It's not like if you like the Harlem Globetrotters, you don't like the NBA, right? They've tapped into something, and I don't know how they've done it. Like, I was thinking this to myself. You were probably thinking this. I know you've talked about them a lot when you were talking to Cole. Like, if he'd come to me 10 years ago, what was he running the team in Greenville or something like that, and said, "I've got an idea. Get this. We're gonna do like, a Max Patkin kind of thing, for the modern day, like a barnstorming House of David kind of thing where there's all kinds of it's a carnival atmosphere with baseball." I would have said, good luck. Right. And I would have been, and that's representative of my business acumen. But they have really, I think it says that we're looking for ways to come together as communities. We're looking for ways to have fun, and there's a lot in the world right now that's not fun. And these guys, it's pure fun. It's not about, these are the rules that were etched in stone, by Alexander Cartwright 170 years ago. As much as I respect those rules and as much antipathy as I have for the Ghost Runner, as you guys, this is a fun brand of a game that resembles baseball.
Yeah, I would agree. And honestly, I went to the Phillies World Series game, one game, and my poor wife, God bless her, to bring this up briefly, we went to the no-hitter game. And my wife has been to probably 20 baseball games in her life, maybe, and wow. 18 of them were with me in the time we've been together.
She got a no-hitter.
So, and she saw a no-hitter, so apologies. But to the same, then at Citizens Bank Park, we saw the Bananas, and it was just an unbelievable amount of energy. And that's why I said we had to get Jesse Cole on this podcast. Now, Jeremy, I hate to, this is typical of our podcast, right? We bounce around a little bit.
Merch is a big part of it too, though. The merch, the little, all that, like, I've never seen so many yellow jerseys in my life.
Right.
Like, oh my God, I can't imagine how, I mean, they're selling out Yankee Stadium. You can't get in there.
And what
like, the first round of the playoffs, wherever they end up, right? They're not going to sell out that place.
My one buddy who came with us for that game is now the world's biggest party animals fan because he bought all of the visiting team gear. He was like, too many people are wearing yellow. Someone needs to root for the party animals.
I was rooting for the firefighters.
Right? Yeah.
And I don't throw around these accusations lightly. You know that, Tim. But I think they got cheated at the end of that game. I still don't understand how they ended up losing that game. They had like a 3-run lead with 2 outs in the ninth. Next thing I know, like some guy's running the other way around the bases. And then there's nobody, like some guy from the Bananas hits it into outfield. There's nobody in the outfield. And they beat the firefighters. If I were the firefighters, I'd have some issues with that.
Yeah, I think it was rigged. All right, Jeremy, we should finish on a funny note, but I want to finish on an important note, and you need to help me with this. Look, just let me say this. You're the best journalist we have at ESPN, and after your father, you are the best interviewer I have ever seen. But you started your career, help me here, on the other side of the camera. Would you explain that and what that did to help you get on this side of the camera?
Yeah, I mean, it was very simple. I mean, I was young. I was 23, and fortunately, my father had a lot of entree and a lot of friends at ESPN. And I went up there for a job interview. I'd been working in local television in New York. I'd spent 1 year working at your old company, Tim, at Time, as it was then known, Time Life. And I was working on these special projects for the 1992 Olympics. Technically, I was a Sports Illustrated employee, but I had nothing to do with Sports Illustrated other than the fact that I would sneak into the library. What was it, on the 6th floor? And just like rummage through all those great old books and the files. And then I went to work for a local TV station in New York. And then, I went up to ESPN for an interview, and they, offered me an opportunity to start doing some freelance producing. And that became full-time after a few months. And it was a totally different kind of ESPN. Everything's different, right? This was 30 plus years ago. And, when you were a bureau producer, which is what I was in New York for 2 years, you covered everything. You covered the NFL, you covered baseball, you covered soccer, you covered basketball, you covered the Final Four. You got to go, a lot of people now are mostly siloed in their sport. Everybody's kind of a specialist, but back then you got to do everything. And they hired me as a producer. I had made it clear that I wanted to be on air, and they said, okay, you'll settle down, you'll get a shot, let's see if you can do this job. And doing that job for a couple of years, I got to work with some of the best people in the business. I mean, I got to work with the reporters I worked with, Jimmy Roberts and Mark Schwartz and Steve Cyphers and Andrea Kramer and David Aldridge and Peter Gammons. And, and I got to see them I'd seen my dad do the job all those years up close, but seeing other people do it, pressure situations, everybody watching Sports Center, covering trials, covering games, covered Don King's federal trial for 7 weeks with Jimmy Roberts. And then after a couple of years, basically what happened was I got a couple of on-air chances at ESPN. They were not very impressed with me. And I got an offer to go work. We would have worked together at CNNSI.
Right.
And I thought I was going to take it. And then they said, Vince Doria, who was my boss and my mentor, said, all right, do another audition tape. Like, you could probably do better. And I did one with Willie at Wimbledon. And then, a lot of these things come down to timing and luck. Pam Oliver, who was our reporter based in Texas at the time, which essentially meant covering the Cowboys, left for Fox. So she goes to Fox in the summer of 96. And now there is no one to go to Valley Ranch every day and talk to Troy Aikman and Michael Irvin and Emmett Smith and that whole cast of characters, Barry Switzer at the time. So Vince calls me. I was working for NBC at the Olympics in Atlanta. He says, I think we got something for you. I'm like, what? He said, how do you feel about moving to Dallas? I'm like, I'll move anywhere, wherever you want me to move. Never lived outside of New York. And he said, all right, you're going to Dallas. And I went to Dallas. and they haven't been able to get rid of me since.
So, Jeremy, my first day in Dallas was in January of 1982. I walked in.
Did he still have wait, did you get the tip for being the paper boy or
that came
my favorite
soon after? So I'm a Maryland guy. I'm not a New York guy, but I'm a Maryland guy. And Jeff, I go all the way to Texas, and I'm scared to death because I've never been basically outside of Maryland. I go to work at the Dallas Morning News. I walk in the office the first day.
Dave Smith?
Dave Smith was the sports editor, who was my sports editor in Washington. But I walk in, and I'm like 12 years old. I'm 3 feet tall. Legend. It's embarrassing. Harless Wade, what a great name for an old Texas sports writer. He looks at me, and he says, I never met him. I haven't met anybody yet. And he looks at me, goes, you must be the new guy. And I said, yes, I am. And he goes, you are the smallest Yankee I've ever seen in my life. That's what he said to me on my first day at the Dallas Morning News. Basically, my first day in Texas. So he ripped me for being tiny. Agreed. And then he called me a Yankee. It was Yankee. Yeah. So you had similar.
And you're from a border state. I'm a Yankee.
Right.
So
we're the Mason-Dixon line over here.
Right. So Jeremy, New York to Dallas was not an easy adjustment, although I learned to love living in Dallas. So let's be clear about this. I loved living there, but it took a little while. Smallest Yankee I've ever seen.
It was a great experience for me. I was there for less than 2 years when Jim Cohen, another of the old time ESPN bosses, called me after about 2 years and said, hey, how do you feel about coming back to New York? I think I was at the airport before I hung up the phone. And don't get me wrong, I like Dallas. I really did. But I was never there. I was probably on the road 200 days a year at that point. And I was like, God, it's hot. It was really hot. And it was a lot of cowboy stuff, which was great. I was on the air every day, but it was that was after they'd won the 3rd Super Bowl in 4 seasons. And then it kind of went like that. And it was just controversy after controversy, which again, it was great experience as a reporter, but I was eager to get back to the Northeast. My first night in Dallas. So this is a funny story. So I didn't know a soul. I didn't know a single person who lived in the state. And I went to a party. A friend of mine in New York, my girlfriend in New York, actually, she was from Texas. And she said, go to my friend's house. He always has a bunch of people over. And he was this, man about town in Dallas. Anyway, there's a guy at the party that night, probably like 20 people. And he's a very talkative guy, and he's a big sports fan. He's asking me about what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. And he's telling me about his company, blah, blah, blah. And this guy's girlfriend worked for him. Anyway, long story short, I go to have lunch with him next week. He shows me what his business is. Again, an example of my business acumen. He shows me exactly what he's doing. I say, he said, it was about putting the internet on radio. And I'm like, and he showed, where'd you go to college? I said, Cornell. He said, you could listen to Cornell hockey games on the radio now. I'm thinking like, why would I do that? Like, that's just like something that wouldn't occur to me, but as much as I'm a fan. Well, it was Mark Cuban.
Amazing.
And he sold his business about 6 months later for $2.2 billion.
And you could have gotten in for about $100.
I don't think so. I'd written like one column a week. $2.2 billion. It was audionet.com. It became broadcast.com. And, my friend's girlfriend who worked for Mark, I thought she got a check for $16 million. I saw Mark years later. I said, is it true that April got $16 million? He said 25. And I think she was working for like minimum wage.
So Jeff, we finally found something that Jeremy isn't great at. His business acumen. He had lunch with Mark Cuban and he had no idea where it was. Nothing. I would have been in the same boat. I would have done Nothing. I would have done exactly what Jeremy did. Oh boy.
Oh my God.
All right, Jeremy, we've taken almost an hour with you. Thank you so much for putting up with us. It was so much fun. We laughed and we learned as we always did. Now I got to go look at my wallet and see how my bills are lined up because I feel so inferior after Jeremy. I feel so good.
Ames, Boston. That's it. It's not hard. Ellis, San Francisco. Those are all out of circulation. It's sad.
See, Philadelphia. Don't waste my time.
All of my knowledge is not only useless, but obsolete. like me.